If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on?
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of our Nerd Enthusiast movie podcast. Today, I've got a full house here, big group. We're going to be talking about The Last of Us, the entire TV series that just came out on HBO recently. So from left to right, I have Ian Delaney, Brooks Leibee, myself, Mike DiGiorgio, and the one and only Marcel Patterson. One and only. He has a brother, but he's not here. He's working, so we'll forgive that.
Only.
He is the only then, the only Marcel. So thanks for joining us once again. Follow us on our YouTube, our social medias, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere you can. Donate to Patreon if you feel so inclined. But let's jump right into it. The Last of Us. We're talking about the show, right? Not the video game. So all of us have played the video game.
That's right.
Have
Multiple times.
Beaten the video game.
Multiple times.
Beaten it. Even Brooks has beaten it. Wow. Or you've watched it, played through it. The first one.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
I played
Because I remember for
when it first came
years,
out
I'm
on the
pretty
remake.
sure for years, Marcel and I were like, Brooks, you should play the game. And Brooks was like, nah, I watched it. I watched the playthrough. It's fine. So I'm glad that you've played it yourself now. Yeah, he knows. He knows. So I'll start off with the loaded question for all of us. How does the game compare with the show? How does the show compare with the game? Are they companion pieces, or is it like you should play the game and then watch the show, or is it you shouldn't play the game at all and just watch the show? What are your thoughts on that, guy, Ian? What do you think?
I think you are perfectly fine doing either or. I think the show it's enough of a difference that you're only gaining if you do both, but you're not losing anything if you do one or the other.
Okay.
So like if you've only played the game, you have the exact same story told slightly differently with slightly different story beats. But if you only watch the show and have never touched the game, you get the exact same story told slightly differently.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, and I think those major differences in the game are, those sections of gameplay.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
we can't really
Yeah, you can't
translate
capture
that
that. Yeah.
into film. Games have tried game to film and TV show adaptations have always tried to do like that third person or first person gameplay thing, and it never works. So skipping those sections, I think, was literally the best move that they could make. Just trim the fat, get the important narrative beats, and I think they excelled in that.
And then, I guess, to ask a rhetorical question to answer the first question, was the show necessary? Because the game is already so cinematic.
Yeah, I think that was a big concern for people.
I think, I forget what the title of the 30-minute documentary was called that Brooks and I watched. The documentary that HBO put out after the series wrapped.
Oh, I think it's just called The Making of The Last
Making
of Us.
of The Last of Us. Neil Druckmann had explained to somebody who had the same concern, and I think Druckmann
He put it very well.
brilliantly put it that there will be the game is so perfect and cinematic, and like you could watch gameplay and it's amazing, but there will just be people who will never pick up a controller, and there will be people that will just never take the time to watch the gameplay. So like TV and film will always have that like oomph that video games are still fighting a stigma against. So like, oh, it's just another form of entertainment, but some people just stick to film and TV. So
Absolutely.
I personally think the TV show home run-ish. It's
Home run-ish. It's
we
close.
got everyone
It's
off
at the fence.
Yeah, we got everyone
It's on
off
the winning
off
track.
the plate. That's the important thing. I think it's the best video game adaptation
Absolutely.
we've ever had.
By far.
See, the thing for me, this is something I struggled with, and I came to terms with it. I had to get it out of my own head. You have a very specific experience with the game. You as a person, it's very personal to you. You can relate to certain aspects of it. You live with these people for 35 plus hours. It is impossible to replicate that feeling in the
10
show.
hours.
And people were complaining about, like, oh, some of it moves too fast. And I agree there's some sections that do move truncated, but we also are looking at it from a lens of having sat through a section in an hour for an hour where you're crouched down somewhere looking for supplies, scrambling for something, going back, killing one thing, going back, versus the show going. Well, wow.
I thought there was a shelf
humble.
down there.
Where the show's going, we can't.
Infected under the floorboards.
We can't have an hour sequence of just scavenging for shit, right? We can't find 6 bullets, a can of whatever, a med pack, whatever. That's just not very interesting TV. But it does add context to the relationship, because during those moments there's one-liners, there's Ellie being a smartass, there's Joel, grumbling about something. So there's a lot of that stuff that it's hard to encapsulate all of that to a show. And once you get past that aspect of like, oh, well, I have to stop thinking it in terms of my own personal experience. You are literally meant to feel like you are these characters for 30 hours. And the game does a tremendous job of that. And I think if you've played it, you understand it. But I'm also always curious to see what people think who have never played the game. And most of them, 99% of the time, are like, I love it. I love the show. I can't find anything wrong with it. I can't find a fault with it. Right. And typically, like, the complaints they do have about the show, maybe the Left Behind episode, things like that, episode 3, things like that, which are more, that speaks to another issue people have. They're some of the best parts of the game. I think Left Behind is one of the best. It's probably some of the best DLC we've ever gotten. Let's talk about the pace of the show. How do we feel about the pace? It's 9 episodes?
Yes.
9 episodes?
I feel like it's in a walking pace until it starts to just run for the ending.
It's the HBO style.
The moment they...
It still sticks the landing, but I do think it has to run. It jogs.
It does. It starts to really
the Joel,
fly.
Or the Henry and Sam section, I feel like that's when it just starts sprinting, whereas before we were like maybe power walking.
Yeah.
And I feel like I think the Sam and Henry section is when I felt the pacing sort of pick up, and that, like, maybe not to a degree that I liked, because I always felt... See, again, it speaks to, like, gameplay and, like, having to walk around with these characters for,
It's hard to replicate that.
X amount of hours, whereas, like, we just met Sam and Henry at the end of one episode. They have their arc, and then, like, we lose Sam and Henry at the end of the very next episode, and I just felt like we could have used a little bit more of them. But that's just me being nitpicky. The show's great. Pacing. Other than that, I feel like the pacing is pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to build a connection. Sam, like you said, Sam and Henry, you have a whole arc playthrough. You play with them in the game, and then in the TV show, you have an hour and they're gone.
Yeah. I think, too, my biggest issue was there seems to be a quick... We know what's happening, but there seems to be a really quick transition between Joel not giving a shit about Ellie, kind of starting to care about her, and then I will do anything for this girl. Yeah. It's very quick. I think it's a very quick twist in the last episode, and it's like you can feel the show being like, hey, everybody, you really got to care about these two really hard now because something's about to happen. I think the show kind of signals, kind of gives away, I mean, it's still a great twist, but it kind of gives away like what's coming because they really hard sell the relationship far less subtly than the game does, obviously, because it has 35 hours to boil this relationship up. But there's even that line, I think, towards the end of the season where Joel's like, I didn't have a reason to live, but now I do. And he like looks at Ellie, looks Ellie like right in the eyes, and she's like
straight up spelling it out.
Yeah, and it's like the audience knows that like you don't have to hit it that hard on the head. Like we know like there's a new reason. Yeah. He has a new reason to fight for something now. So there's moments like that where you're just like wish you could kind of pump the brakes, but a lot of the stuff, man, they really stick the landing on. And honestly, I say the show is a great compliment to the game because it adds things that the game didn't have, right? The history of the virus.
All of episode 3.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff I thought was really cool. And it kind of was like, wow, this would have kind of been interesting to incorporate into the game in some way because it gives way more context to the entire world and what's happened.
Typically when people hear that there are added things or maybe things that are different, people just sort of like clutch their pearls like, oh my god, they're changing the source material.
Yeah, just like that. That
but
Patrick
no, like,
Stewart.
The best part is that it's all coming from the
creators,
game developers,
the
people, and they mentioned before the series even premiered that a lot of what we see that's new was stuff that didn't make the cut in the game.
It was written for the game, but either didn't make it in for technological reasons, or it was unnecessary for how long the game would end up being.
Yeah.
And you got to think of it as a gameplay perspective too, right? Like, you see some of the flashback stuff. It's like, how do you incorporate that into a gameplay section? Do you make the player play a different character here, or is it just an audio log or a video thing that they watch? You know what I mean? And so, yeah, there's probably those kind of implications.
Like the cold open, I think, was the alternate idea for the game, where you have like the montage with newsreel audio clips, things like that. I'm pretty sure it was said that the cold open for the show was originally intended for the game as well, but they felt it a little bit more interesting to have that artwork.
Interesting.
And news clip with Gustavo's music.
So let's switch gears a little bit. Big controversial issue. Let's talk about the casting for the show. I know everybody's kind of up in arms about Pedro Pascal. And even Bella Ramsey, I feel like people were kind of like, that's not my
Definitely
alley.
more for Bella.
That's not my alley.
Yeah.
Which is so sad.
Which is interesting. What are your thoughts?
So I was definitely one of the ones, like, when I saw the initial casting come out, I saw
hell no.
Bella. Well, it wasn't a hell no. It was, I've seen Bella Ramsey
was like a
only in Game of Thrones. And I was like, switching from Game of Thrones to, smart ass Allie is going to be it's a hard sell for me. And then I saw her and Joel's like first interaction in the first episode. I'm like, yeah, that's it.
She's got it, yeah.
She's got it. And then Joel, I mean, Pedro Pascal is Pedro Pascal always.
Yeah.
I figured he'd knock it out.
Bella Ramsey always had a different uphill battle that Pedro just didn't have to climb. Pedro is so charismatic, and we've seen him in multiple things at this point. He's an established name, whereas Bella had only done Game of Thrones, like we mentioned, and
That's true. That's a good point.
Bella had to fight a lot of, let's be real, like bigotry and like misogyny to win over some people.
Yeah. People who are really caring about her looks for some reason as a 14-year-old.
And I truly think that as it stands, like personally, like it really did flip by the time the show ended. I was sold more on Bella being Ellie than Pedro being Joel, if that makes any sense.
I
and
agree.
like they're both still very much Joel and Ellie, but Bella like acted their ass off.
Because Pedro does a really interesting approach to Joel, where he really emphasizes the softness behind that like grunt that he has become. Like even in the QZ, he has these really soft moments where like Tess comes back and they spoon.
Yes.
And it's this really tender, short moment, whereas, that moment's whenever he wakes up in the game, right? It just adds really interesting approach to Joel that is unique to the game, but are unique to the show, but is slightly touched on in part 2.
I just think it's interesting that so many people are like, they had the perfect Joel, he was Troy Baker. And then you see Troy in the show and you're like, wow, he doesn't look like...
He's a French fry.
He doesn't look like... Yeah, he doesn't look like Joel at all. Like, I just personally... Because he's obviously older now, too. But, like, I remember watching his cameo and being like, yeah, he's not... He may sound like Joel, be able to sound like Joel. He's definitely not Joel, though.
Right.
Like, he doesn't embody... I think all the physicality, all the characters. And Pedro, like you said, Pedro is Pedro, and
he fits the bill.
He can kind of just slip into that role perfectly. I think Pedro has the subtleness down so well of Joel, because he does it so well in the beginning where he's just so to himself. Pedro has that like protected like wall. He portrays that like he puts that wall up so well over his character, and slowly you see it chipped away throughout the season, and he portrays that character extremely well. And then there's just a warmth to him that you only get in glimpses, particularly with Sarah, Nico Parker's character, who I think is like perfectly casted.
Oh yeah,
she's one of my favorite parts of that first episode. But yeah, Bella, I agree. Like, she already was in the hole when this started. People looked at her and they were, and it's always like an appearance thing, which is I think weird to me. Like, people really can't get over the idea of like, oh, it's just they have to look exactly like this. And I'm like, but you have the game. If you want just the 1-to-1, just play the game. Then I prefer a little bit of variance from something I've already been through. I would like to see a different interpretation of it, because I think that adds to the experience then. And
no. It's on Naughty Dog.
It can only
it's
be
on
1-to-1.
HBO.
Yeah, it can only be.
They didn't find an Elliot Page clone.
They ruined.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because let's be honest, Ashley Johnson looks very little like Ellie from the game. I mean, she might have a couple freckles.
But Bella Ramsey looks a lot like a young Ashley Johnson. I got.
She kind of does. Yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good casting in that regard. So.
And plus, Bella Ramsey, I don't know what their audition process was like, but Bella already knows how to play guitar and everything. So like.
They had the reins.
Yeah.
Already set up with her.
Nick Offerman. Let's talk about him for a second.
Dude.
Was wonderful.
I think it's probably his best role he's ever played, right? I mean, I haven't seen all of his material, but
I feel like that's going to be the Emmy episode for performance.
Hands down, that's a side of Nick that
writing.
I didn't think existed, to be honest.
Yeah, because up until that point, to be real, he was only ever Ron Swanson.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've only seen
right.
my memory, Parks and Rec is ingrained in my memory as that character, so yeah. Anytime I picture him, he's kind of a jackass, you know what I mean? And there are shades of a little bit of that. Yeah, there's shades of Ron in this, but it works really well.
It's like a bit of they flipped that character on his head.
Which is probably what they were going for and why he was cast. He's this total, like, libertarian, keep the government away from me type survivalist.
Doomsday prepper.
Buckets in the debate in the basement.
Yes.
Literally what happens if he finds, like, the love of his life at a time when, if the apocalypse hadn't happened...
In the worst possible time,
If the apocalypse hadn't happened, he would never have been able to find that level of happiness and just be himself, which I feel like is an excellent commentary in that episode. And the show takes place in 2003 also. That's another key difference where the game takes place a decade later. In 2003, gay and homosexual relationships were not really, looked very greatly. So
no, people did not favorably about. Still don't look very favorably about him, but even more so then.
It took the apocalypse for this guy to find happiness, which was very interesting.
Well, and people kept arguing, oh, this episode's a throwaway. Nothing happens. It's a pointless episode. But the whole point of the show and the theme of it, and for Joel, is find something worth fighting for. And each episode kind of gives you that moment. Like, each interaction with the character slowly reveals to Joel, oh, there's something right in front of you that you're missing that you need to be worried about and worth fighting for. And obviously when it finally does dawn on him, it becomes his obsession then, right? It becomes his only focus then. But all the other characters throughout the episodes have these moments where it's like, oh, now I have something worth living for again, even though life is terrible and never could be the same. At least I have that one thing that I can fight for, that I can strive for. And I think, Perry and Bill's whole episode is just incredibly done, and gives so much more context than the game did for Bill, I think, because I barely remember Bill in the game.
Bill got nothing in the game. It was like
it's kind of a throwaway character.
Have the truck gun.
Yeah, it's a throwaway character.
Yes.
And there was like little things in the environment that you could kind of find out about Bill for, but there was very little context to what the hell what their relationship even was, between Bill and Joel. And this is a whole other. We even get flashback of them, having a dinner together, which is really cool. Tess and Joel and Bill and Perry, which I think is really awesome. So, all integral moments and just written extremely well. Gabriel Luna, talk about him, Tommy. What do we think?
He was very Tommy.
The
way
100%.
he fulfilled Jeffrey Pierce's voice, I can't. Every time I heard him, I'm just like, that's Tommy.
Yeah.
That's more Tommy than the game's Tommy.
And, I like that his character is sort of a guy that's also done with it all, and he's found the happiness that Joel clearly is, like, trying to get back also. So it's like, listen, man. Listen, big brother. I'm trying to do the Tommy.
Couldn't if I tried.
Could not if I tried. Yeah, he's got his arc, and it'll be very interesting to see his Tommy in season
that's what I'm excited about, because Tommy does come up far more in the spotlight into the next game
And
season.
there's an added barrier, or I don't know if it's a barrier, but they're having a kid.
Yep.
Yes.
Him and his wife.
The stakes are even higher then, right? Yeah, I look forward to their interactions, because I think, obviously we won't spoil anything, but there's an interesting void that ends up being need to fill with some of the characters. So casting wise, for me, it feels on point. It feels exceptional. Let's talk briefly, a little bit of spoilery, some of the cameos. Ashley Johnson's cameo. Troy Baker's.
Ashley Johnson's cameo got me so bad because Ashley Johnson is one voice. Mm-hmm. So when she was talking as Anna, I'm like, oh, that's Ellie, but not Ellie. So I just every time
but
she
she's
said,
the mother of Ellie, so it works. So it works, right?
Very that scene is a very beautiful. And
oh my gosh, it's a perfect.
It works
moment.
because that scene obviously is for Ashley Johnson, but like by the time it aired, it felt like it was for everybody that spent the last decade playing and replaying The Last of Us, and it's just like we're literally seeing
for you.
we're seeing
for the fans,
the person who created the Ellie we know and love, and just like giving birth to Bella Ramsey's Ellie, which is very, very fitting.
It's the perfect compliment to the character, and it also makes me wonder why Ashley Johnson doesn't get more work because she's a phenomenal actress.
So she came a long way from the Avengers.
Apparently, the waitress, guffaws over Captain America to, fending off a clicker while giving birth was an incredible sequence on itself, and the explanation for why Ellie is immune is fascinating to me, and it bears more analysis because the game really doesn't give you anything, and you just think that she's an anomaly. You're just like, oh, she's just the 1 in a million trillion that has this ability, like she's superhuman, and she's not affected by the virus. So this gives way more context, as crazy as it might be that it works this way. It's like science, science, it works. But yeah, Ashley Johnson, that guy, I got pretty kind of choked up when she finally arrived, and it's worth the wait. But there's a part of me that's like, her cameo actually benefits the story like way earlier because of the relationship with Marlene, right? And it gives so much more weight to what the hell Marlene's doing, and I think you have that to carry you through the finale, because it does kind of feel like, oh, by the way, this is very important. They were really good friends. Also, she gave her the most important mission of her life with this child. So obviously Marlene cares, because I don't think there's enough sympathy given to Marlene and her decision. Like, Marlene has to be struggling more than anyone else because she grew up with this spot. Ellie grew up with this woman. She was her caretaker. She promised her mother that she would take care of her, and then she has to make the decision basically to
and led Riley
decide
into
her life.
Resistance.
Yeah, decide the fate of her life in that finale. So I don't know if there's enough weight and context given to that. We know as playing the game, but in the show, I think you can kind of miss the importance of those relationships.
Absolutely. The only thing we get is I knew her mother.
Yes. Yes.
That's the other key thing that the show improves on is backtracking just a little bit. Maybe speaking to motivations, but they vastly improve Joel and Tess's motivations for starting out this journey in the first place. Where in the games, they only agreed to smuggle Ellie to the Fireflies because
they're owed guns.
They are owed weapons. Which is, it's a fine motivation. Like, none of us ever questioned it for the last decade.
It works in a video game.
It works in a video game.
We need more guns.
In the series, they do something even better, which is, again, going back to Tommy, Joel is, dead set on finding his younger brother because it's time to go get his brother. And it just works better in a series, so.
Adds a bit more color to, the familial relationship. Because there is that thing where it's, who is Joel fighting for in his life? Apparently it's Tommy, because he's literally about to go cross country to save his brother again. I mean, in the pilot episode, he has to go bail his brother out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good foreshadowing, right? It's like he's constantly chasing down his brother. Yeah, and that's true, because once there's no more Tess, it's like, who does he have then? You know what I mean? He doesn't have anybody else that he probably even associates with, other than maybe the one guard that he ends up annihilating. His one friend he has to, and I think it's so funny because talking to some people, they're like, wow, so many people, all of these main characters keep dying, and I was like, well, you do realize the show is called The Last of Us, and it's about loss. The whole show is about loss. So and it's what HBO is. It's what HBO.
I was waiting for
It's what HBO is exceptionally good at, and that's why I think it's funny that it's the perfect network for this show because
Absolutely.
if anybody's great at killing off characters, it's HBO and Game of Thrones. So it's
Yeah.
like they are no shit. They were probably chomping at the bit when this came around. They were like, we know what to do with this. We can't
Combined
wait
with
to get
the,
rid of
you
these
You do
people.
what to the brothers?
We can't wait to deal with
Combined
these.
with the filmmaker that gave us Chernobyl.
Oh yeah, and you get that
And the
aesthetic.
Scary Movie franchise?
Mm-hmm.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Duality
That's a
of
good.
man.
That's a good segue, Brooks. You want to talk a little bit about the cinematography?
Oh yeah, I thought it was gorgeous. I like that they did all that they could to avoid the volume technology. I feel like that's becoming such a quick go-to in TV these days. Which it does make it quick, but you're still compositing, you're still laying stuff in, and that's all part of the filming process now. But you know, they built massive sets with lighting rigs. I mean, on the cinematographer's Twitter, he has threads where you can see like all the work that he put into these lighting grids that covered yards sometimes.
There's a tangible feeling when the set's real, and obviously the actors will agree to this. But you can feel the coldness, the snow, those sections, the dilapidated worlds. They're not just big green screen walls. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you can interact with the environments. Then you know what I mean? Yeah, just brought up some pictures. Yeah. So yeah, hopefully we can throw up some images of this. But yeah, you can feel you almost need to feel those environments beyond just the green screen because
And
just
there's tons
walking,
of
fake
handheld.
walking through a CG environment does not have the same
Right. Like there's set
visceral
extensions,
appeal.
but you kind of have to
right,
do that with.
right, because they can only build out so many blocks.
Right.
Of
And this
of
is a COVID production too. We have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a
they
good point.
had all
Right.
these restrictions during the pandemic.
Oh yeah,
and
that
they
hotel scene with the underwater stuff
Yeah.
that was fantastic.
Oh,
were
yeah.
that's-
able
that was
to accomplish
massive.
all of this under
Gorgeous.
COVID.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't think people quite realize the amount of work that went into the journey, the arc of where they go, and I kept comparing it to Lord of the Rings a little bit. It's like this trek
Yeah.
across country, to Mordor. Ellie is the
deliver
ring.
the one
You know, Ellie is. When you think about it, they're kind of similar, right?
One
Like,
girl to cure them all.
yeah.
Tess'S Gandalf.
It's kind of similar, isn't it? Like this journey. I mean, it's a lot quicker in the show, but
Yeah.
in the movie is, you know, we'll get into that.
And
Sound.
with the camera,
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we go into-
into sound.
like the emphasis on handheld was something that was immediately apparent. I think the entire first episode was handheld, other than maybe like a few aerials in the QZ. But whenever, like in episode 3, there's that one shot. It's the crane that goes over the
Yes.
the fence when Bill finds Frank in the
Yes.
hole. I'm like, that's probably one of the first few times they used a steady
Yeah, that's a good point.
rig,
Yeah,
and that adds so
that's
much
a good point.
emphasis to the shots when they do, because you know they're keeping it scrappy. They're filming 360. They're again because of those massive sets. They have the option to film wherever they want to find coverage.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think doing it too cleanly removes that, because there's always that, and the game does this too. There's always that foreboding. That's why the handheld, the shakiness, adds to the disturbedness of the game, because you're always sort of off kilter, and the camera's always sort of
It's like part one.
You're always kind of shaking, like you're always sort
Part
of
one with the camera sway, and you're trying to aim.
yeah, you're always sort of worried about what's next, and
Yeah.
and the show mirrors that really well. And I think because doing too clean, David Fincher style, dolly work everywhere and
locked off
sweeping
camera,
angles, is a very different show. It's a very different feel.
Right.
Has a gloss to it. Then it doesn't feel natural, visceral, like lived in.
Similar to Succession, which that's a whole other conversation. But
Yeah.
the way the way that show is shot, it's so strange because they
Yeah.
do the same thing, but it goes from Office to like David Fincher sometimes, and very interesting.
So sound.
Music,
Or
sound.
music, yeah.
What did y'all think
The
about
things
these?
we hear.
I mean,
Things we heard sound design?
It's very one-to-one to the game.
yeah, I've
and
always loved it.
I
'cause
appreciate that. Like, where if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
you know Gus's music probably more than anyone,
Gustavo.
but Gustavo. But I remember playing, like watching certain section and being like the Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, like, wait a minute, isn't that from the second?
From part 2, yeah, there was a lot.
Isn't that from the second game?
Which I think is gonna work.
Which is interesting
to the show's
foreshadowing.
favor.
Yes.
Yeah, they're gonna do.
Which is smart, just
some cool
smart
stuff with that.
directing, editing, writing. You know that they're kind of foreshadowing certain themes that you hear, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. It's 1-to-1. There's some abbreviated stuff like the charge in the hospital, the Last of Us Vengeance. I think that was very well done. It added some really cool stuff, like in the opening phrases, but then it becomes like a really like trimmed version of the track from the game, which is still great. I just wish it was longer because it's so good.
Yeah.
But we still have the track from the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, music was never an issue. Was never going to be an issue probably, unless they took it out and changed
Unless
it
it
altogether.
wasn't Gustavo, which
yeah, I was going to say.
There is a co-composer, David Fleming, who did work on Dune, the Blue Planet series, Planet Earth. Works a lot with Hans Zimmer.
Probably has a few.
He did. They really
Has
did
some
a part
chops.
2 thing here, where it's like Gustavo's going to do narrative and themes, and then David Fleming is going to run in with combat and more aggressive
Interesting.
music.
That's cool.
Yeah,
way to
you can
go.
really hear his Duneisms in the combat music. It's very, very odd sounds and deep percussion.
Interesting.
I want to talk briefly about, since we mentioned it, the hospital sequence. I think Marcel and I have discussed this a little bit. I want to get all of yours take on the hospital sequence. Is it as good as it is in the game?
I think the hospital
Is
sequence.
it satisfying?
I think it is, just because it's not the game, because you aren't playing it. It doesn't make sense in a show to watch him go through and take out every person. Oh, in the game I peeked around a corner and popped him with an assault rifle. I feel like just...
You have access to a flamethrower in the game too, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
don't you? So you could Leo DiCaprio.
Oh, yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the
But-
hospital wing, if you
yes.
wanted to.
I think it helps the show.
Yes.
Just not trying to show the whole ending and rather just cutting it up almost like a workout montage. Just
Montage.
A workout.
A shooting spree montage.
yeah, just he's going person to person, floor to floor in seconds instead of the because I feel like dragging that out would have made that like a 2-hour
Oh,
episode.
yeah, you could spend an hour just
Just going
brutalizing.
through the hospital.
Yeah, which
I agree.
yeah.
It feels like it does drag for me though, or a drug. I have not watched it again since watching it straight to face. It's just like it's montage and it's a moment and you can feel it, but I'm like I don't know. It had a weird like disconnect with
Yeah,
me.
I was kind of feel that way a little bit.
Maybe it's because it's not gameplay. Maybe it's because you're
Yeah.
not
I felt
trying to get to Ellie yourself.
I think it's a lot of it's because there's a lot of slow motion too. It feels a little bit more Hollywood in that regard.
Yeah.
I think the disconnect is slightly warranted because I think this is that point in the show where up until then we were on Joel's side, and like
Yeah.
I think the game and the showrunners are making a definitive stance for us that we are not supposed to agree with what Joel is doing. Therefore, we take a back seat and just watch this montage of Joel literally just becoming an active shooter in this hospital, which is like, yeah. So
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and that's exactly my thoughts too. Because there's those, I just keep coming back to those shots of like the bullets hitting his feet and the shells hitting the ground, and like the slow motion shots of him as he approaches. And there's a different, like you're saying, it's a big shift in the Joel we've come to know. And a big complaint I kept hearing from people was, well, all of a sudden he turns into Rambo or Terminator. And earlier on the season, he's like inept, and he kind of is, right? He's constantly like getting injured. He's not a great shot. Like the first time he encounters like a clicker or some of the zombies, he's a complete shit at a shot. Like he completely misses, like we do in the game. We're just like, oh
Right.
shit,
The museum,
I gotta run. Yeah,
He's
I
learning
gotta
the controls
hide.
finally.
Yeah, he's learning the sway, and it's like it's awkward. But yeah, all of a sudden, but I think you go both ways because I think you can say, well, now he has a focus.
Yeah.
He has a dead set like mission. And before, it's like, if he's not
Whatever
fighting
happens,
for something,
happens.
yeah, if not, it's almost like, because he talks about wanting to kill himself at some point. So I think there's a part of him earlier on in the season where he's just like, well, if this is it for me, oh well, at least, I've tried. And so, but this is more like, I have one objective and one reason right now to exist, and I am going to make sure nothing gets in my way for it. I think that...
or die trying.
Yeah, and that's the focus more for that stuff because, by all means, like 30 of these Fireflies should be able to stop him, right? One guy lumbering down the hallway with an assault rifle or whatever weapon I love the switching of weapons. So it's like he places one down, picks one, it's like equipped, goes on his weapon wheel, bing, bing, bing,
Was it the
pulls up
M16?
pulls up the
From the game.
and then and that stuff is, it's just a shift in the cinematography and even like the sound design is different for all of this. And you said it perfectly too. Like, there's the active shooter aspect, which makes it kind of terrifying because it's like you're just like, whoa, Joel, whoa,
This
whoa.
is the Joel that we had been alluded to throughout the entire series, which was like.
And I feel like
the things I've
shift,
done.
Yeah.
the shift started like it finally hit its point horizon after he got injured.
Yeah.
And when he got up and Ellie was nowhere to be found, and you see him with those two people he captured,
he's
and
he's
he
ready to
just
do anything
absolutely destroys
he's willing to
both
do
of them.
anything to get what he wants. Yeah.
David actually got it the easy way, the butcher's knife, because if Joel had found him.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, the thing too in the game, how many times do you rip people apart? In the game, you know what I mean? You can execute people in the game. It's very visceral from the beginning. From the first levels, you're already decapitating people, crushing their heads. So we see that Joel as a player really early. We're so when that hospital scene comes in the game, you're like,
Oh.
I don't care.
With Robert.
You're all gone. I'm like, and when I was playing, I was like, I got to get to Ellie.
Right.
I was like, I'm going to Ellie. I don't care. I was getting there. I'm sure it was similar for some of you guys. So I was like, I have to get there as fast as possible because even though I know it's not timed, I feel like it's timed. So I need to get there before something happens to her. And the game does a good job of giving you that immediacy.
Yeah, because the music's building.
Uh-huh.
It's pushing you forward.
And you're like, I have to get to the wing. I have to get to the surgery room. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about this. We won't spoil anything, but the lingering shot of the surgeon after Joel deals with him, and then the
absolutely
lingering long for 2-3 seconds. I said to somebody, I was like, put that picture in your mind because I bet you're going to see that again.
Face seal.
Yeah, but take a picture of that because I think you might see that again.
Butterfly effect.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, and I think I was talking to our other Ian friend about it because he hasn't. I don't think he's played or seen.
Either.
I don't think he's seen, or maybe I was talking to somebody else. He hasn't seen the second game, and they were I was trying to say can you guess kind of what's happening? And they were like, oh no, I'm not really sure, but I know something's probably coming because he left all those nurses alive, and so word has to what I would imagine was. No one's alive in my game. I don't know how anybody found out because I didn't leave anyone alive.
I am a psychopath.
You were Joel. You had to save Ellie beyond all means. So
I can't believe Laura Bailey was there to see it.
I know.
Right?
And she was left. That's crazy.
Crazy.
What's the significance?
What's a Laura Bailey?
Yeah.
What's a Laura Bailey? So any before we wrap it up, anything you would do differently with the show? If you had some options, if you were the producer, HBO, and you were evaluating all of the shows, did you have some notes? Do you have some notes, Marcel?
I feel like in a near perfect show, it's hard to find improvements, but there's always room for improvement. I think just for me personally, and I know it sort of cancels out because the premiere episode was so long. Me being a Game of Thrones fan, I know the consequences of having shorter seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like with only 9 episodes, they hit it like I said, almost a home run, but the important thing is we got everyone off the plate. 9 episodes I felt was just a little too short, and especially with episodes that deviated from the main A-plot. As great as episode 3 and the Left Behind episodes are, I would not change them. They should stay in the season. I feel like a solid 10-episode first season would have been perfect and ideal, and especially with the last episode 9, only being 43 minutes long. That was a concern of mine when I first heard it on Twitter. But then when I saw the episode, I felt like it was fine. They stuck the landing. I still would have made it a little longer. That's just me. Or just add a whole episode entirely to make it a full 10 episodes. But
like that nice even round
yeah,
number.
That's just my OCD talking.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm not really sure what I would change. Maybe, I don't know, little nitpicky things. Like in the pilot, there was an incredible shot that is so haunting. Where it turns into a short oneer where we're with Sarah, and then you hear this noise, and the light comes down through the sunroof, and it's planes, airliners that cannot land. And so there's 5 or 6 in one shot, and they're all just trying to find a place to land, and they can't go anywhere. Terrifying, and it continues. There's a fake out with the car, And after that fake out, it cuts to another very complex shot with a lot of extras. If they could have found a way to bridge that and just continue it, even if it's a whip pan, edit between that somehow, that's probably things like that, where it's a lot more of those visceral sort of, real-time shots where it kind of implements gameplay in a way. 'Cause, like Children of Men, which is the only other movie that the whole car sequence made me think of.
Right.
That is a valuable oneer. That's a valuable oneer, that whole car sequence in Children of Men to think of. That too, that scene. Yeah, and I just, with little things like that sprinkled throughout the season where, they could have pushed the fold a little bit further. They still knocked it out of the park, but, like you said, there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I can't think of anything I would change, like just off the top of my head. I mean, there's stuff that, having played the game, and a joke I said to Marcel right at the end of the first episode, when Joel absolutely goes ballistic on his guard friend and then picks up his assault rifle, was there's no way we get the assault rifle that early in the game.
You'd be too powerful early on.
Right. But other than that, there's nothing like, I can't think of anything immediately that's just like, that could have been done differently. Because, I mean, episode 3, while it was, all backstory, I think was a perfect time to hit that backstory. Left Behind was exactly where it needed to be in the show, in terms of just expanding on the whole story of The Last of Us. I even, the only thing I might not have done is cameo for a part 2 character, which is there for a half of a breath.
Yeah, most people miss that. Yeah, I don't think anybody. If you haven't played the games, you probably didn't even notice it.
Yeah, just having her there for, a half.
What are you looking at? And runs away.
Yeah, and then runs away, which gives her the line in part 2. Oh, I saw you eating or whatever. Great, but
that's a tough.
That's a thing that hasn't happened yet.
That's a very tough callback.
That one was for the fans.
It was
100%.
I think my main
YouTube reactions.
My main critique, and it's kind of nitpicky, and it's just more being like a fanboy, I guess, of the game. I kind of felt like the bloater was a kind of a waste of time in a little bit of ways. I'm not saying they got to go to a gym and fight him with minimal resources. But what was kind of missing a little bit was like the resourcefulness of Joel and Ellie a little bit. And I love in the finale that ladder moment is mirrored from the game where she gets excited and drops the ladder. God damn it, and that whole moment is there, and it's like it's very underused, and it's almost irrelevant in the show, the bloater. It's almost like, hey, look what we can do.
Right.
It's the akin of the zombie polar bear for me in Game of Thrones. It's like, look at this crazy creature we spent so much money on.
Right.
And obviously it's an actor in a suit, which is awesome. The thing looks crazy, but it comes almost kind of cartoonish. That whole sequence, like it's like rising, it's like a monster. It becomes a monster movie all of a sudden. It's like rising out of the earth, and it's like throwing people.
It kills one person.
Yeah, I would have liked to see them either deal with it or like, because maybe it's going to come back. Maybe they're saving it because it'll come back again. This thing will come back again in part 2, which could be fulfill my like wants of like it's kind of a wasted thing because it's a big part of the game. Like it's an oh shit moment in the game of like, how do we deal with this?
That's
thing?
probably why. They didn't want to pull other cards. Just
and you bring that back in the game. And you're like, this thing. You bring it back in part 2. This thing again. How'd he get to Seattle?
Because season 2
it's like, how'd he get to Washington?
We might not even see the full brunt of like.
That's true.
The what's that called? The Day 0 or Ground Zero. The infected that you find in part 2 with all that. Yeah.
The Rat King. Yeah, there's so much more. That's the thing. It's so much more to this story, and that's what excites me. And especially, I guess we can ask this as a question too. How do we feel about? I think Marcel. I don't know the answer for Marcel. How do we feel about the next season maybe being multiple seasons from part 2 of the game?
The second game is too big.
Second game is massive. 50 hours plus.
Yeah. So, I am probably greatest idea. I have not beaten part 2.
Oh, interesting. How far are you? You don't have to spoil, but like
So
lengthwise.
I know the whole how it ends.
Mm-hmm.
I know all of that. I know why everything's done. But I think I made it to Seattle Day 2.
Interesting. You have
Ellie or the other one? The other Ellie's Day 2 or the
Ellie's
other?
Day 2.
you probably have still chunk left. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think last time I talked to someone, it was a third.
Yeah,
Like a
that's-
third of the way through the
The
game.
game is long.
Yeah.
Second game is long.
But even
I think
I can understand how big that is. Absolutely, part 2 needs to be 2 seasons.
I think part 2 is going to be far more. If we know this, part 2 is going to be far more divisive than part 1.
Yeah.
I think it's going to lose a lot of people,
The
which
chance
is
you
okay.
could sit better with TV audiences.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. Who knows?
You've met the
TV
internet.
audiences are
You've met the
surprising
internet, haven't you?
I'll say,
Meet the
probably
internet.
not.
I think part 2 will separate, and there's more than just what happens early on. More that some of the relationships and some of the other characters and some of the relationships between the other characters is going to piss a lot of people off. But I mean, I loved it. I thought this, and as it should be, the second game I thought was better than the first game.
Yes.
It's usually the way, right? It should be an improvement on everything.
Part 2 is my favorite video game.
It's incredible. And it's meant to make you angry. It's meant to stir you up. I think that's the mark of a good game or film or whatever show.
I've never had a
Stirs
visceral
you up.
reaction
People
like
don't
in part 2.
remember that the first game started off with a real tearjerker moment, and people just were expecting the second game not to do that, not to do the same.
As we've already said, the consequences
It mirrors
of
itself.
actions.
It's like poetry.
It rhymes. George Lucas would be proud.
Filmmaking forefather.
So let's wrap it up. What do we think? See it above all else. Is it the best thing that's come out this year on TV? Is it the
This year?
best show HBO's put out this year?
It's up there.
I think it might be. For me, it might be.
100%.
Yeah.
I think it might be.
It's up
Feel
there.
like-
That and Poker Face, I think, are like some of my favorite TV out right now.
Yeah.
House of the Dragon has competition.
And House of the Dragon.
House of the Dragon was very good. We didn't have to review that, but that was very good. So, see it, enjoy it. Last of Us. I think especially across the bar, this season is a pretty safe season to just enjoy and take in. Even if you haven't played the game, I think we've established whether you play the game or not. I think you're gonna find.
Set aside 9.5 hours of your time.
Is that what it ends up being?
I think so. Maybe 8 or maybe
Roughly.
10.
With some change.
That's a
Because the
pretty
first
good.
episode's so long. So
That's a pretty good run. So,
Feature length.
thanks for joining us on another episode of Nerd Enthusiasts. Don't forget, like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Blogger, wherever. Donate to the Patreon, and we will see you next time on the next movie podcast.
If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on?